Ever watch like a bird building its nest or a squirrel burying a nut
Yeah.
and just wonder like why they do that? It's like they're following some kind of plan, right?
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to deep dive into that plan. Uh, it's called evolution.
Okay.
We'll be using The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins as our guide.
Cool.
Don't worry, it's not as like scary as the title might sound.
No, it's a really fascinating book. It looks at how all kinds of creatures, from, tiny ants to giant whales, have changed over millions of years to survive.
So Dawkins says it all boils down to these tiny things called genes.
Right.
They're like instruction manuals inside every living thing. They tell it how to grow, how to behave, all that stuff.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that these genes are kind of selfish.
Selfish.
Yeah, they basically want to make more copies of themselves.
Well, like how does a gene being selfish make an animal do things like eat a bunch of food or fight off rivals?
Well, imagine you're a lion and you're hungry. The genes that make you a good hunter are going to help you catch more food, right?
Makes sense.
That means you're going to be stronger, healthier, and have more energy to have cubs.
Gotcha.
And guess what? Those cubs are going to inherit those same hunting genes.
Oh, so it's like a chain reaction.
Exactly.
The selfish genes that make you a good hunter end up helping your cubs become good hunters too.
Yeah, it's not just about lions either. Think about those birds building nests that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Genes that make a bird good at building a safe and cozy nest are going to help its chicks survive.
Okay.
And then those surviving chicks will pass on those nest-building genes to their own chicks.
So it's like those genes are saying, hey, if we help this bird build a great nest, we get to keep playing the game for another generation.
That's a really good way to put it. And sometimes being selfish can even mean helping others, especially if they're family.
Wait, hold on. How can being selfish mean helping others? I don't get that.
Dawkins gives this example of black-headed gulls. They sometimes eat their neighbors' chicks, which seems mean, but it gives them more food and energy.
That makes sense for that gull. But what about the parents who lost their chicks? Doesn't that hurt their chances of passing on their genes?
It does, but remember, there are tons of other gulls out there. And the ones that are better at protecting their chicks, they'll pass on their genes, while the genes of the ones who weren't as successful, well, they might not.
So even though it's sad for some gulls, it's all part of this big game of survival and passing on genes.
You got it. And this idea of selfish genes can even explain why some animals seem to act selflessly, like worker bees sacrificing themselves to protect the hive.
Oh yeah, that always seems super noble to me. Why would a bee give up its life for the hive?
Well, think about it this way. Worker bees are all sisters, so they share a lot of the same genes. By protecting the hive, they're protecting the queen, who can then lay more eggs and make more bees that share their genes.
Ah, so they're helping their family and, in a way, helping their own genes survive. It's like a big family team effort.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to think about it. And it shows how even actions that seem purely selfless can be explained by this idea of selfish genes working to make sure they survive.
It's like those worker bees are playing the long game.
Yeah, exactly.
Their genes are thinking, hey, if we help our sister, the queen, make more bees, our genes are going to be everywhere.
Right.
But Dawkins says there's this other myth we need to bust. The idea that animals work for the good of the species.
Right. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Dawkins argues that it's not about the group, it's about individual genes trying to succeed.
So like every gene for itself.
Yeah. He uses this great example to illustrate this.
Oh, I love examples.
Okay, so imagine a flock of birds sharing food.
Okay.
Everyone's being nice, sharing. But then one sneaky bird decides to keep all the food for itself.
Oh, a rule breaker.
Exactly. That selfish bird gets stronger, has more babies, and guess what?
Olive Hill.
Those babies inherit those selfish genes.
So even if a group starts out all cooperative and friendly, one rule breaker can change everything.
Exactly. And pretty soon the whole flock might be full of those selfish birds because those genes were better at spreading.
It's like a domino effect.
Exactly.
It makes me think about those penguins hesitating to jump in the water.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they were afraid of getting eaten, but maybe it was also their genes making sure they survived to have their own chicks.
That's a great connection. It highlights how, while genes are powerful, they don't always perfectly control an animal's behavior.
Okay.
There's this complex interplay between genes, the environment, and even random chance.
So it's not just a simple selfish gene equals selfish animal.
Right.
It's more like this dance between the genes and the world around them.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And that's what makes studying evolution so fascinating. It's like trying to understand this puzzle with millions of pieces.
This is making my brain do a little dance, too. But if evolution happens at the level of the gene, like Dawkins says, what about things like culture? I mean, we humans learn from each other, right?
Right.
We share ideas,
Yeah.
not just genes.
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of what makes us human.
Oh, okay.
Dawkins argues that while our genes might give us certain tendencies, we're not slaves to them.
Yeah.
We have this amazing ability to learn and to choose how we behave.
So we're not just puppets controlled by our genes.
Right.
We can actually, like, rebel against those selfish genes if we want to.
Exactly. We can choose to be kind, generous, and cooperative, even if our genes might be whispering, look out for number one.
That's a relief. Imagine a world where everyone was only looking out for themselves.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty chaotic.
It would. But luckily, we humans have this amazing ability to learn from each other, to build communities, and to create systems that benefit everyone.
So it's like those selfish genes accidentally helped create a species that can actually overcome selfishness.
It is. It's a fascinating paradox.
Wow.
And it's what makes understanding human nature so complex and intriguing.
Yeah.
We're this mix of biological drive and cultural influences, constantly evolving and adapting.
But if we're so good at cooperation, how come we still see so much conflict and competition in the world? It's like those selfish genes are still, like, lurking in the background.
That's a very astute observation. And it brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of evolutionary theory.
Okay.
The tension between short-term gain and long-term sustainability.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about this short-term versus long-term thing.
Okay, well, think about it this way. Imagine you're a kid with a big bag of candy.
Okay.
You could eat all that candy right now.
Yeah, I love candy.
It would be super delicious and satisfying in the short term.
But my mom always tells me to save some for later. Why is that?
Well, if you eat all the candy at once, what happens later?
I get a tummy ache, and I don't have any candy left for tomorrow.
Exactly. And it's the same with our actions in the world.
Right.
Sometimes we're tempted to do things that benefit us in the short term, even if they might have negative consequences later on.
Like polluting the environment so we can drive cars and have factories.
Exactly.
That helps us now, but it might hurt the planet in the long run.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge we face as a species. How do we balance our immediate needs with the long-term health of our planet and future generations?
It sounds like a really tough balancing act. But how do those selfish genes fit into all of this?
Well, remember, genes are mainly focused on survival and reproduction in the here and now. They don't necessarily think about the long-term consequences of their actions.
Right.
It's up to us, with our amazing brains and our capacity for learning and cooperation, to make those long-term decisions.
So it's like we have to become smarter than our own genes. We have to outsmart those short-term desires and think about the bigger picture.
You got it. It's like we have to become genetically enlightened. We have to understand our own biological tendencies and make conscious choices to act in a more sustainable and cooperative way.
That's a big responsibility.
It is.
But it also sounds kind of exciting.
Yeah.
It's like we have the power to shape our own destiny, not just as individuals, but as a whole species.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And that's the message that I find so inspiring about Dawkins' work. It doesn't just tell us about our past, it gives us a glimpse into our future and the amazing potential we have to create a better world.
It's like we're in the driver's seat and those selfish genes are like giving us directions from the back seat.
Yeah.
We kind of have to listen to them, but we also have the power to choose our own path.
That's a great analogy. We have to acknowledge those biological drives, but we can also recognize that we can make choices that benefit not just ourselves, but like our communities and future generations.
It's like those selfish genes help create a species that can actually think beyond just me, me, me.
Exactly. And that's what makes us humans so remarkable. We have this capacity for empathy, for cooperation, and for long-term planning that really sets us apart from other animals.
But knowing about those selfish genes can still be helpful.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
a warning sign.
Yeah.
It says like, hey, watch out for those short-term temptations.
Absolutely. It's like knowing your weaknesses so you can work on them.
Yeah.
If we understand those selfish tendencies in ourselves, we can make conscious choices to act in a more generous and sustainable way.
So it's not about ignoring those selfish genes or pretending they don't exist.
Right.
It's about like recognizing them and then choosing to act differently.
Exactly. It's about harnessing our knowledge of our own biology to create a better world.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? Like, how do we make sure those selfish genes don't take over?
Well, I think it starts with education. We need to teach kids about evolution, about genes, and about the importance of thinking about the long-term consequences of our actions.
So more books like The Selfish Gene, but maybe with more pictures for the younger reader.
Exactly. The more we understand about how evolution works and how our own brains are wired, the better equipped we'll be to make good choices.
But it's not just about reading books, is it? It's also about taking action.
Absolutely. We need to create systems that encourage cooperation and sustainability. We need to reward long-term thinking and make it harder for those selfish impulses to take over.
So things like investing in renewable energy, protecting the environment, and making sure everyone has access to food and healthcare.
Precisely. Those are all ways to create a world where those selfish genes don't have as much power because everyone's basic needs are met and we're all working together to create a sustainable future.
It's like building a world where those selfish genes actually want to cooperate because they know it's the best way to survive.
That's a great way to put it. And that's the message I hope people take away from Dawkins' work. We're not doomed to be selfish. We have the power to choose a different path, a path that leads to a more cooperative and sustainable future.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty hopeful after this deep dive. It's like, yeah, those selfish genes are part of who we are, but they don't have to control us. We have the power to make choices that benefit everyone, not just ourselves.
That's a wonderful takeaway, and I think it's a message that resonates deeply with people of all ages. We all want a world where kindness, cooperation, and sustainability prevail, and understanding our own biology is a powerful first step in making that happen.
Well said.
Eh,
And on that hopeful note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. We covered a lot of ground today, from sneaky gulls to the future of humanity. But the big question we want to leave you with is this. What choices will you make to create a world where cooperation triumphs over selfishness? Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.